The city knew him as a billionaire who built empires from nothing. His face appeared on business magazines, his name was spoken with respect and sometimes fear. People believed he had everything a man could ever want. Tall buildings carried his signature. Expensive cars waited for him every morning. Powerful people returned his calls within seconds. But none of that mattered inside his home, where silence ruled every corner. His son had never spoken. From the time the boy was 3 years old, words simply disappeared from his life. At first, doctors said it was a delay. Then they said it was trauma. Later, they used longer words that sounded smart but explained nothing. Years passed, and still, not a single word came from the child's mouth. The boy heard everything. He understood everything. His eyes followed conversations closely, sharp and aware. But his lips remained sealed, as if something deep inside refused to open. The mansion was large, but it felt empty. Long hallways echoed with footsteps. The walls were filled with art chosen by experts, not by love. Every room was perfectly clean, yet none of them felt warm. The only place that felt alive was the small corner where the boy liked to sit, usually near a window watching the world outside. He could sit there for hours, quiet, still, holding a small toy or a book in his hands. The father often stood at a distance, watching his son without knowing how to enter that silent world. He wanted to speak, to ask questions, to hear his child laugh or cry or complain. But instead, there was always quiet, a quiet that felt heavier than any noise. In public, the father was confident and strong. He spoke on stages, led meetings, and made decisions that affected thousands of lives. People admired his sharp mind and calm voice. No one would have guessed that at night. When the lights dimmed and the house slept, he sat alone in his study, staring at old photos of a smiling little boy once tried to speak. Those photos hurt the most. There was a time when the boy had made sounds, small, broken words that never fully formed. He had laughed loudly once. The father remembered that laugh clearly. It echoed in his memory like a ghost. That sound disappeared after a painful chapter in their lives. One the father tried not to think about, yet never escaped. The boy's mother had left. She didn't leave quietly. There were arguments, raised voices, and long nights filled with tension. The boy had been there, hiding behind doors, listening. One morning, she packed her bags and walked out without turning back. The house had felt colder ever since. Not long after that, the boy stopped trying to speak. At first, the father thought the silence would pass. He threw money at the problem, believing the best experts in the world could fix anything. Speech therapists came and went. Child psychologists spent hours trying to connect. Some were kind, others distant. All of them eventually shook their heads with careful words. He may speak one day, they said, or he may never speak. Those words stayed with the father. He heard them during meetings, while driving, even in his sleep. The idea that his son might remain silent forever slowly broke something inside him. Despite everything, the boy was not unhappy in a simple way. He smiled sometimes, especially when animals were around. He loved watching birds land on the garden fence. He enjoyed music, especially soft piano sounds. When someone played music in the house, he would sit closer, his face calm, his eyes peaceful. The father noticed these small things. Over time, he started spending more evenings at home. Business dinners were canceled. Trips were shortened. He began reading to his son at night, even though there was no response. He would sit beside the bed, reading stories in a slow voice, hoping the words would reach somewhere deep. Sometimes the boy would look at him during those moments. Their eyes would meet, and something unspoken passed between them. Love, sadness, and questions without answers. The father often wondered if the silence was his fault. He remembered the years when work came first, the times he promised to come home early and didn't, the missed birthdays and school events. He had believed providing everything meant being a good father. Now, standing in a silent room, he realized how wrong that belief had been. One evening, after a long day, the father sat on the floor beside his son, something he had never done before. He leaned against the wall, tired and defeated. The boy glanced at him, surprised. The father spoke softly, not expecting an answer. "I don't know how to fix this," he said, "but I'm here now." The boy didn't respond. But he didn't look away either. That small moment felt like progress. The staff in the house noticed the change. The father was calmer, more present. He started eating meals with his son instead of alone. He asked the caretakers questions, not instructions. He learned how his son communicated through small signs, how a raised eyebrow meant curiosity, how tapping fingers meant discomfort, how turning away meant fear. Still, the silence remained. Outside the mansion, the world continued to praise the billionaire. Interviews praised his leadership. Articles celebrated his success story. None of them mentioned the boy who never spoke, sitting quietly behind glass windows, watching life from a distance. At school, the boy was gentle and intelligent. Teachers admired his focus. Other children didn't know how to treat him. Some tried to talk to him, others ignored him. He never complained. He never defended himself. He simply observed. One teacher once told the father, "He understands more than people think." Those words stayed with him, late at night. When the house was asleep, the father often stood outside his son's room. Listening to the soft sound of breathing, he wondered what thoughts lived inside that quiet mind. What fears, what memories, what pain. He promised himself something during one of those nights. No matter how long it took, he would not give up. Even if the boy never spoke, he would make sure his son never felt alone again. The silence had shaped their lives, but it had not broken their bond. Something was slowly changing, even if no one could see it yet. Deep inside that quiet world, a voice waited, and one day it would find its way out. That day was closer than anyone imagined. Morning light entered the mansion softly, spreading across the floors like it was afraid to make noise. The house woke up slowly. Staff moved quietly, careful not to disturb the calm that always surrounded the boy. Silence was not just a condition here. It had become a habit, almost a rule. The father stood by the kitchen window, holding a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. His eyes were fixed on the garden where his son sat on a bench, watching the leaves move with the wind. The boy liked mornings. They were peaceful, before the world demanded anything from him. The father remembered a time when mornings were rushed. Meetings, calls, drivers waiting outside. Back then, he barely noticed the sun. Now, he watched every small detail as if trying to catch up on years he had lost. He walked outside and sat beside his son. No words, just presence. The boy did not look surprised anymore when his father joined him. That alone felt like progress. The father had started changing his life in quiet ways. He no longer scheduled early meetings. He refused international trips unless absolutely necessary. His assistants noticed, but no one dared to question him. For the first time, business was no longer the center of his world. Instead, his son was. The boy communicated without sound. When he wanted water, he pointed. When he didn't like food, he pushed the plate away gently. When he was tired, his eyes drooped, and he leaned back. The father learned these signals slowly, sometimes getting them wrong, sometimes laughing at himself. One afternoon, the father tried something new. He brought out an old photo album that had been locked away for years. Dust covered the edges. He hesitated before opening it, afraid of what memories might surface. He sat on the floor, the album between them. The boy leaned closer, curious. The pages showed a different time. A smaller house. Simpler days. The boy as a toddler, smiling widely, standing between his parents. The father watched his son's face carefully, afraid of causing pain. The boy touched one picture gently. His fingers stayed there longer than the others. It was a photo of his mother holding him, both smiling. The father felt his chest tighten. He wanted to explain, to apologize, to tell his son that none of it was his fault, but the words stayed trapped behind his teeth. That night, father couldn't sleep. He sat alone, replaying every mistake he had made. He remembered arguments spoken too loudly, doors slammed too hard, promises broken too often. He wondered how much the boy had seen, how much he had understood. People often assumed children forgot easily. The father now knew that was a lie. The next day, he visited the boy's school without announcing himself. He stood at the back of the classroom, watching quietly. The boy sat near the window, focused, calm. He followed the lesson closely, writing carefully in his notebook. During break time, other children ran around laughing and shouting. The boy stayed seated. One child approached him and spoke, but when no response came, the child shrugged and ran away. The father felt a sharp pain in his chest. He wanted to walk in, to say something to protect his son from loneliness, but he stayed back, realizing that some battles could not be fought with money or power. After school, the father drove his son home himself. No driver, just the two of them. The road was quiet. At a red light, the father glanced at his son. "I wish I could hear your voice," he said softly. "Not because I need it, but because I want to know you feel safe." The boy looked out the window, his reflection faintly visible in the glass. That evening, a therapist visited the house. She was gentle and patient, different from the others. She didn't push. She didn't ask difficult questions. She simply sat and played small games, letting the boy lead. The father watched from a distance. After the session, the therapist spoke quietly. "He feels deeply," she said. "He remembers more than you think. His silence isn't emptiness. It's protection." Those words stayed with the father. Protection. From what? From pain? From disappointment? From losing people he loved? That night, the father sat on his son's bed, the lights dim. He spoke honestly, without planning. "I know I wasn't there when I should have been," he said. "I know I can't change the past. But I'm not leaving. Not ever." The boy's breathing slowed. His hand moved slightly, resting closer to his father's. It was a small movement, but it felt like a bridge being built. Days turned into weeks. The father stayed consistent. Same breakfast time. Same evening walks. Same bedtime stories. The boy began expecting him. One day, during a walk, they passed a street musician playing a soft tune. The boy stopped walking. His eyes filled with something close to emotion. The father noticed. "Do you like it?" he asked. The boy nodded. It was the first clear answer the father had received. His heart raced, but he didn't react. He didn't celebrate. He simply smiled and stood there, letting the music play. Later that night, the boy hummed softly in his room. The sound was faint, barely there, but it was sound. The father stood outside the door, frozen, afraid to breathe, for the first time in years. The silence cracked just a little. Something inside the boy was waking up, and the father knew, deep in his heart, that whatever came next would change their lives forever. The change was not loud. It did not arrive with clear signs or big moments. It came quietly, the way healing often does. The father noticed it in small details. His son began looking at people a little longer. He stayed closer during walks. He no longer pulled his hand away as quickly when their fingers touched. Life continued with its usual rhythm, but something underneath had shifted. The father became more careful with his words. He spoke slower, softer, choosing honesty over comfort. He stopped pretending everything was fine. Instead, he talked about feelings, even when they were heavy. Some evenings, they sat in the living room with the lights low, listening to music. The boy preferred soft sounds, simple melodies. The father learned which songs calmed him and which ones made his eyes fill with emotion. He never asked why. He simply stayed beside him. One afternoon, the boy came home from school earlier than usual. He walked in quietly, his bag hanging loosely from his shoulder. His face was pale. The caretaker noticed first and called the father immediately. When the father arrived, he found his son sitting on the stairs, staring at nothing. Something had happened. He sat down in front of him and waited. No pressure, no questions, just presence. Slowly, the boy reached into his bag and pulled out a crumpled paper. It was a note from school. Not a complaint, not a warning. It explained that during group activities, the boy often stayed silent while others spoke for him. Some children laughed, not loudly, but enough to hurt. The father closed his eyes. Anger rose in him, sharp and fast, not toward the children, toward himself. He should have prepared his son better. He should have protected him more. That evening, the boy did not eat much. He pushed food around his plate and stared down. The father sat across from him, feeling helpless. Later, during their usual walk, the boy stopped suddenly. A group of children passed by, laughing loudly. The boy flinched. The father knelt beside him. "You don't have to be like them," he said quietly. "You don't have to speak until you're ready. And even if you never speak, you still matter." The boy looked at him, his eyes shining. That night, the boy had a nightmare. The father woke to soft sounds from the boy's room. Not words, not crying, just breath coming too fast. He rushed in and sat on the bed, placing a hand gently on his son's back. The boy clutched his shirt tightly. The father held him, rocking slowly, whispering calming words. He stayed like that until the boy's breathing slowed. When the boy finally slept again, the father did not leave. He stayed in the chair beside the bed, watching his son's chest rise and fall. For the first time, the father allowed himself to cry. He cried quietly so no one would hear. Years of guilt poured out. Regret for moments missed. Fear of moments yet to come. He promised himself again that he would never let his son feel abandoned. Days later, the therapist suggested something new. A small gathering at home. Familiar people. No pressure. Just connection, the father agreed. A few trusted adults came over. Soft music played in the background. The boy stayed close to his father at first, gripping his hand. As the evening went on, something unexpected happened. One of the visitors began telling a story about feeling invisible as a child, about being afraid to speak. The boy looked up. He listened closely. His body still. The father noticed his son's fingers tighten around his hand. Later that night, after everyone left, the boy sat quietly on the couch. The house felt heavy with emotion. The father sat beside him. "Sometimes silence is a shield," he said gently, "but you don't have to hold it forever." The boy turned toward him. His lips moved slightly. The father froze. No sound came out. But the movement was there. Real, intentional. The boy looked frightened by what he had almost done. He looked away, his body tense. The father did not react. He simply placed his hand over his son's. "It's okay," he said. "There's no rush." That night, the boy did not sleep much. The next day, the father canceled all meetings. He stayed home, watching quietly. In the afternoon, the boy picked up a notebook and began writing. Short sentences, broken thoughts, feelings he had never shared. One line stood out. "I was scared you would leave too." The father felt the words hit him like a wave. He knelt beside his son. "I'm here," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." The boy stared at him for a long moment. Then, for the first time, the boy opened his mouth and tried to push sound out. Nothing came, but the effort was real. His face showed frustration, fear, and hope all at once. The father stayed calm, though his heart pounded. "Take your time," he said. The boy closed his mouth and leaned against him. Exhausted, the silence returned. But it was no longer empty. It was full of something new, something fragile, something close to a voice, and the father knew, with certainty, that the hardest moment was still ahead. Because once a voice begins to wake up, it cannot be ignored forever. The days that followed felt heavier than before. Not because things were getting worse, but because everything felt close. Too close. Like standing at the edge of something life-changing, not knowing when it would happen. Only knowing that it would. The father moved through his days carefully, afraid that one wrong step might push his son back into the silence he had lived in for so long. He spoke less, listened more. He watched every small movement, every expression, every breath. The boy seemed tired. Not sick, not weak, just emotionally worn out. Some mornings, he stayed in bed longer than usual. Other times, he wandered through the house without purpose, touching walls, furniture, familiar objects, as if grounding himself. The therapist explained that this stage was fragile. When emotions begin to surface after being locked away for years, they can feel overwhelming. The boy was not just learning to speak, he was learning to feel safely. One evening, the power went out during a storm. The house fell into darkness, broken only by flashes of lightning outside. The wind howled, and rain hit the windows hard. The staff moved quickly, lighting candles, checking rooms. The boy froze. Storms had always frightened him. Loud sounds, sudden changes, darkness. His breathing became fast and shallow. His hands shook. The father noticed immediately. He crossed the room and knelt in front of his son, blocking out everything else. "It's okay," he said softly. "I'm here." The boy grabbed his arm tightly. Thunder crashed again, louder this time. The boy flinched and buried his face against his father's chest. The father wrapped his arms around him, holding him firmly. Protectively, "You're safe," he whispered again and again. They sat like that on the floor while the storm raged outside. The father felt his son's heart pounding through his chest. He rocked him gently, just like he had during the nightmare nights. Minutes passed. Then something happened. The boy pulled back slightly. He looked up at his father's face, eyes wide, filled with fear and something else. Urgency. His lips parted. The father's breath caught in his throat. The boy tried to speak at first. Only air came out. A weak sound, broken and unsure. His face tightened with effort. Tears filled his eyes, not from fear, but from frustration. The father did not move. He did not speak. He stayed still, giving his son space. The boy tried again. The sound was faint, almost not there. But it was sound. The father felt his whole body shake. The boy's eyes widened, shocked by his own voice. "Da." The father's hands trembled as he held his son's shoulders. "It's okay," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm right here." The boy swallowed hard, gathering everything inside him. "Dad." The word came out soft and uneven, but clear. The room seemed to stop breathing. The storm outside faded into nothing. There was only that one word hanging in the air like a miracle. The father stared at his son, unable to move. Tears spilled freely down his face. He didn't try to wipe them away. "You said it," he whispered. "You spoke." The boy began to cry. Deep, shaking cries that had been trapped inside him for years. He buried his face into his father's chest, gripping him tightly. The father held him crying, too. Not quietly this time. He didn't care who heard. Staff stood frozen at a distance, eyes filled with tears. No one spoke. No one dared to break the moment. The boy pulled back again. Breathing hard, I was scared, he said slowly, each word a struggle. "I thought you would leave." The father's heart shattered and healed at the same time. "I should have stayed," he said, his voice full of regret. "I should have listened sooner. I'm sorry." The boy nodded, tears running down his cheeks. "I didn't want to talk," he said, "because when people leave, words don't help." The father pressed his forehead against his son's. "I'm not leaving," he said. "Ever." The boy closed his eyes and let out a long breath, like he had been holding it his whole life. After that night, the house felt different, not louder. Just alive. The boy did not suddenly become talkative. His voice was soft, and he used it carefully, like something fragile. Some days, he spoke a few words. Other days, none at all. But the silence was no longer a wall. It was a choice. Doctors and therapists were informed, but the father refused to turn the moment into a spectacle. No cameras. No interviews. No announcements. This was not a miracle for the world. It was a promise kept between a father and a son. Late one night, the boy sat beside his father, listening to music. He leaned his head against his shoulder. "Will you stay tomorrow?" he asked quietly. The father smiled through tears. "I'll stay as long as you need me." The boy nodded. Comforted outside, the storm clouds had cleared. Inside, a voice that had been silent for years had finally found its way home. The morning after the storm felt different from any other morning they had known. Light came through the windows gently, touching the walls as if the house itself was careful not to disturb what had happened. The father woke early, not because of alarms or calls, but because his heart felt full and restless at the same time. He walked quietly to his son's room. The boy was asleep, his face calm, free from the tightness that once lived there. The father stood at the door for a long moment, watching, afraid that if he moved too fast, the moment from the night before might disappear like a dream. But it didn't. When the boy woke up, he sat up slowly and looked around. His eyes found his father immediately. "Morning," the father said softly. The boy hesitated, then nodded. "Morning," he replied. His voice low but clear, the word landed gently, like a feather. Yet it carried the weight of years. The father smiled, pressing his lips together to keep his emotions steady. He didn't rush. He didn't clap or cry. He simply sat on the edge of the bed. "How do you feel?" he asked. The boy thought for a moment. "Tired," he said, "but lighter." They shared breakfast together in the kitchen. The boy ate slowly, speaking only when he felt comfortable. Sometimes he paused mid-sentence, unsure. The father waited every time, patient, letting silence be part of the conversation. Later that day, the therapist visited. She listened carefully, not just to the words, but to the space between them. She smiled softly, reminding the father that progress did not mean pressure. He found his voice because he felt safe, she said. Protect that safety, the father understood. He didn't tell the media. He didn't inform business partners. The world did not need to know. This was not a story for headlines. It was a story for healing. Over the following weeks, life slowly settled into a new rhythm. The boy spoke more, but not always. Some days he used full sentences. Other days, just a few words. And sometimes he chose silence, not out of fear, but comfort. The father learned that speaking was not the goal. Being heard was. They began going on short trips together. Simple places. Quiet parks. Small cafes where no one recognized them. The boy liked watching people, listening to conversations, absorbing the world without being forced to join it. One afternoon, while sitting on a bench, the boy spoke without looking up. When Mom left, he said slowly, "I thought it was because I wasn't enough." The father felt the air leave his lungs. "No," he said firmly. "Never that." The boy nodded, but his eyes were heavy. "I stopped talking because I thought if I stayed quiet, things wouldn't change anymore." The father placed a hand on his shoulder. "I should have stayed with you more," he said. "I was wrong to think money could replace time." The boy looked at him, searching his face. "You're here now," he said. That simple sentence healed something deep inside the father. At school, changes came slowly too. Teachers were informed, carefully. No pressure was added. When the boy spoke in class for the first time, it was to answer a simple question. His voice shook. The room went silent. No one laughed. The teacher smiled and said, "Thank you." That was enough. At home, the mansion no longer felt cold. The walls still stood tall, the room still large, but laughter found its way into corners where silence once lived. Not loud laughter. Gentle, real laughter. The father began turning down projects. He sold off companies that demanded too much of him. People were shocked. Analysts questioned his decisions. He didn't care. Success had once been measured by numbers. Now it was measured by moments. Some nights, boy asked questions about the past. Other nights he asked nothing at all. The father answered honestly when questions came and respected quiet when they did. One evening, while listening to music together, the boy leaned his head against his father's arm. "I like my voice," he said quietly. "But I also like quiet," the father smiled. "Both are okay," he said. Months passed. The boy grew more confident, because he spoke more, but because he no longer feared being left behind. He He knew that even in silence he was seen. On the anniversary of the storm, the father and son stood together in the garden. The sky was clear this time. No thunder. No rain. The boy looked up. "Do you remember that night?" he asked. The father nodded. "It was the night everything changed," the boy said. The father knelt beside him. "It was the night you trusted me," he said. "And I learned how to listen." The boy smiled. They stood there quietly, side by side, not needing words. The world would always know the father as a billionaire, a powerful man, a leader. But in that garden, he was simply a father who stayed. The boy who once lived in silence now knew something important. He never lost his voice. He was just waiting for someone to hear him. Life did not suddenly become perfect after that year. It became real. And real life always moves slowly, with small steps forward and a few steps back. The father learned this as the months passed. The boy continued to grow, not just in age, but in confidence. His voice was still soft, and sometimes he chose not to use it. There were days when words came easily, and days when they felt heavy again. The father never pushed. He remembered how long silence had protected his son, and he respected it. They created routines that felt safe. Morning walks before the city woke up. Breakfasts with no phones on the table. Evenings with music or simple board games. These routines were not exciting to the outside world, but they were everything to them. One afternoon, while walking through a quiet park, the boy suddenly stopped. "Why do people stare?" he asked. The father knew exactly what he meant. Fame had a way of following him, even when he tried to escape it. "Sometimes people look because they're curious," the father said. "Sometimes because they admire, and sometimes because they don't understand." The boy nodded slowly. "I don't like being watched," he said. "I know," the father replied. "That's why I try to keep our world small." The boy seemed relieved by that answer. At school, things continued to change. Not overnight, but enough to matter. The boy began raising his hand once in a while. He read a short paragraph out loud during class one day. His voice shook, but he finished it. After school, he told his father about it. "I was scared," he admitted. "But you did it," the father said. The boy smiled. "I did." That smile stayed with the father all evening. There were still difficult days. Days when memories came back without warning. When the boy became quiet again, distant, lost in thoughts he couldn't fully explain. On those days, the father didn't ask questions. He simply stayed nearby, reminding his son through presence that he was not alone. One night, while sitting on the balcony, the boy spoke unexpectedly. "I thought silence made me invisible," he said. "But it didn't. It made me lonely." The father listened carefully. "I didn't know how to say that before," the boy continued. "Now I do." The father placed a hand on his back. "I'm proud of you," he said. The boy didn't answer, but he leaned closer. News about the father's changed lifestyle began to spread. Fewer public appearances, smaller business ambitions. People speculated. Some criticized him. Others admired him. He ignored all of it. The greatest success of his life was sitting beside him every night. One weekend, the father took his son to a quiet beach. No cameras, no staff. Just the sound of waves and open sky. They walked barefoot along the sand. The boy watched the ocean for a long time. "It's loud," he said, "but peaceful." The father smiled. "Some things can be both." The boy nodded, thinking as the sun began to set. The boy spoke again. "Thank you for staying," said. The father felt his chest tighten. "I should thank you," he replied. "You taught me how." The boy looked confused. "How to listen," the father explained. That night, as they sat near the water, the boy told his father things he had never shared before. How loud voices scared him. How sudden goodbyes felt like sharp cuts. How silence once felt safer than hope. The father listened without interrupting, without fixing, just listening. When the boy finished, he looked lighter, like he had set something down. Back home, life continued. The boy grew taller. His interests changed. He began liking books about space, about how voices travel through distance. He asked questions about the future. Will I always be quiet? He asked one night. No, the father said gently. You'll always be you. The boy smiled at that. On a calm evening, months later, the boy sat beside his father and spoke a sentence that stayed with him forever. I'm not afraid of my voice anymore, he said. The father closed his eyes for a moment, letting the meaning sink in. The world never heard that sentence. There were no witnesses, no applause, but it was the most important thing either of them had ever said. The silence that once ruled their lives no longer felt heavy. It became something soft, something shared, and the father understood. Something deeply. His son had not been broken. He had been protecting his heart. Now that heart was open, and it would never be alone again. Time has a quiet way of changing things. It does not rush. It does not ask permission. It simply moves forward, carrying people with it whether they are ready or not. For the father and his son, time became less frightening and more forgiving. The boy was no longer defined by his silence. But he was also not defined by his voice. He was simply growing, learning who he was, without fear pressing on his chest every day. Some mornings, he spoke easily. Other mornings, he preferred quiet. Both were accepted. The father learned to read his son's moods better than anyone else. A small pause before answering meant uncertainty. A slow breath meant he was thinking deeply. A gentle smile meant he felt safe. These signs mattered more than words ever had. One afternoon, the boy came home from school with a folded paper in his hand. He placed it carefully on the table and sat down. I have to read something in front of the class next week, he said. The father looked at him, surprised but calm. How do you feel about it? He asked. The boy shrugged, scared, but not the same scared as before. The father nodded. That's called courage. The boy thought about that word for a moment, then nodded. They practiced together at home, but not in a strict way. The boy read a few lines, then stopped when it felt like too much. The father never corrected him harshly. He never rushed him. It's not about being perfect, he reminded him. It's about being honest. On the day of the reading, the father did something he had never done before. He took time off completely. No calls, no meetings, no distractions. He sat at the back of the classroom. Unseen by his son at first, when it was the boy's turn, he stood up slowly. His hands shook. His eyes searched the room, then found his father. Their eyes met. The boy took a breath. He read. His voice was quiet but steady enough. He stumbled once, paused, then continued. The room was silent, not with judgment, but attention. When he finished, there was a brief pause. Then the teacher smiled and thanked him. That was all. No clapping, no cheering, but it was enough. After school, the boy walked up to his father. His face flushed. I didn't stop, he said. The father knelt and hugged him. I saw, he said. You were brave. That night, the boy spoke more than usual. He talked about small things, about a funny moment in class, about a question he wanted to ask next time. The father listened, letting each word sink in. As weeks passed, the boy began to open up about bigger thoughts. Do you think people can change? He asked one evening. Yes, the father replied, but only if they want to. The boy nodded. I think you did. The father felt his throat tighten. I'm still changing, he said honestly. One quiet night, while walking through the garden, the boy stopped under a tree. I remember things from before, he said softly. Things I didn't know how to explain. The father waited. When people argued, the boy continued. I felt like my voice would make it worse, so I hid it. The father closed his eyes. I'm sorry you felt that way, he said. The boy looked up at him. I don't feel like that anymore. That sentence meant more than any success the father had ever known. Life outside. Their small world continued to move fast. The father was invited to events, interviews, ceremonies. Sometimes he went, Most times he didn't. When asked why, he simply said he had other priorities. People assumed it was age or burnout. They were wrong. It was love, one weekend. They volunteered quietly at a local animal shelter. The boy had always felt comfortable around animals. He spoke gently to them, unafraid. "They don't rush," he said. "They wait." The father smiled. "Like you taught me." As the year moved forward, the boy began writing short stories. He shared them only with his father at first. They were simple stories about quiet heroes, about people who listened instead of shouting. "You write how you see the world," the father said. The boy nodded. "I like worlds where silence isn't a problem." One evening, as they sat together in the living room, the boy said something unexpected. "I want to help kids like me," he said. The father looked at him carefully. "You already are," he replied. The boy smiled, a confident, peaceful smile. The silence that once felt like a prison had become a place of rest. And the father understood something clearly now. Some voices are not meant to be loud, they are meant to be true. And his son's voice, whether spoken or silent, had finally found its place in the world. Years passed, not in a dramatic rush, but in a calm and steady way. The boy was no longer a small child learning how to use his voice. He was growing into himself, slowly and thoughtfully, just as he did everything else. His voice had become stronger, but it never became loud. He spoke when he had something to say, and stayed quiet when he didn't. People around him learned to respect that. Those who didn't quickly faded out of his life. The father watched this change with quiet pride. He no longer worried every time his son chose silence. He understood now that silence was not weakness. It was choice. The boy changed schools as he grew older, moving into a place where students were encouraged to think deeply, not just speak quickly. At first, he stayed in the background, observing. Over time, he began to participate more, raising his hand when he felt ready. One day, a teacher asked him to share his thoughts on a group discussion. The room waited. He spoke calmly, explaining his idea clearly. When he finished, the room stayed quiet for a moment. Then someone said, "I never thought of it that way." The boy sat down, his heart racing, but his face calm. At home, the father noticed how his son had begun to guide conversations. Not by talking more, but by choosing words carefully. Dinner talks became deeper. Questions became more thoughtful. "What matters more?" the boy asked one night, "being heard or being understood?" The father smiled. "Being understood," he said without hesitation. The boy nodded. "That's what I want." As the boy grew older, people began to recognize him, not as the billionaire's son, but as someone different. Someone who listened before he spoke. Someone who noticed details others missed. Some adults mistook his calm nature for weakness. They were wrong. He had learned strength the hard way. One afternoon, while walking through the city together, they passed a small community center. A poster outside spoke about a support group for children who struggled with communication. The boy stopped. He read the poster carefully. "I want to go inside?" he said. The father followed without question, inside. They met children who reminded the boy of his younger self. Some avoided eye contact. Some clung to parents. Some sat quietly, holding their thoughts close. The boy didn't try to speak to them right away. He sat among them, calm and patient. After a while, one child leaned closer. "You don't talk much," the child said. The boy smiled softly. "I didn't used to talk at all." The child looked at him with wide eyes. "You talk now?" the child said. "Yes," the boy replied, "when I'm ready." The father watched from a distance, his chest full. That day became the first of many visits. The boy didn't try to fix anyone. He didn't give advice. He simply showed them that they were not alone. Over time, the father quietly supported the center. Not with big announcements or his name on the building, just enough to help it grow. At home, life stayed simple. The boy continued writing. His stories grew deeper, more meaningful. They spoke about quiet strength, patience, and trust. One evening, he handed his father a short piece of writing. It spoke about a child who locked his voice away to protect his heart. The father finished reading and looked up. "It's beautiful," he said. The boy shrugged. "It's honest." That honesty became part of who he was. As the father aged, he became less concerned with legacy and more concerned with presence. He understood now that the greatest thing he could give his son was not power, safety. One night, sitting together under the stars, the boy asked a question. "Do you ever regret anything?" The father thought carefully. "I regret not listening sooner," he said, "but I don't regret staying." The boy leaned his head against his shoulder. "I'm glad you stayed," he said. The city lights shone in the distance. The world kept moving, loud and fast. But in that quiet moment, everything felt right. The boy who once lived in silence had grown into someone who understood both sound and quiet. And the father, once known only for his power, had learned something far greater. Some of the most important voices in the world are not the ones that speak first. They are the ones that wait. And when they finally speak, they change everything.